The brutal treatment captured queens faced at the hands of Roman soldiers, the stars above the Solaris system, burned like distant jewels scattered across the dark velvet of space. Planetary colonies orbited peacefully, each thriving under its own queen, a leader chosen not by chance but by wisdom, courage, and vision. These queens were the pride of humanity, tall, resolute, and unyielding in their devotion to their people. They were guardians of knowledge, keepers of unity, and beacons of hope for a species that had once teetered on the brink of extinction. Yet peace, as always, was fragile. The Crimson Legions, an alien empire as vast as it was merciless, had been watching humanity for centuries. Their fleets glided silently through the void, a dark mirror to the human starships that orbited the colonies. They were the Roman-like conquerors of the galaxy, disciplined, organized, and utterly confident in their superiority. To them, humanity was just another fledgling race, weak, divided, and ripe for subjugation. On the morning of the third Solaris cycle, the peace of the colonies shattered. Alarms blared across communication networks. Red warning lights flickered on the surfaces of every planetary capital. Across 3 colonies, queens and their advisors looked up from their councils and planning chambers, their expressions hardening. The signs were unmistakable. The Crimson Legions had arrived. Queen Arya of Lithuria was the first to respond. Her chamber was bathed in sunlight filtered through the high glass walls of the council tower. With hair like spun silver and eyes the color of deep sapphire, she moved with the calm authority of someone who had faced danger before. Yet this was unlike any threat she had faced. Messages from the outer colonies painted the same grim picture: massive fleets, superior technology, and ruthless precision. "They are here," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "We are not their prey, but they will try to see us that way. Gather the council, now." The human queens convened virtually across the star networks, their faces projected in luminous grids. There was Queen Selene of Virlia, known for her strategic brilliance and unwavering resolve, and Queen Talia of Urindor, whose wisdom was matched only by her empathy for her people. Together, they formed a council of unparalleled leadership, strong women who had guided humanity through hardship after hardship. "We cannot meet them in open battle," Selene said, her brow furrowed. "Their fleet dwarfs ours, and their weapons can obliterate cities in seconds." "Any attempt at direct confrontation is suicide," Arya nodded. "Then we fight differently. We survive, observe, and plan. Humanity is clever, and cleverness can topple even the mightiest opponent." Before they could take action, the Legion struck. Massive cruisers dropped from faster-than-light travel near each planet. The human defenses responded, sending fighter swarms into the void, but it was hopeless. The legions moved with precision, disabling orbital shields, severing communication networks, and sending boarding craft to each planetary surface. On Lithuria, the invasion was terrifyingly efficient. The first landing teams, clad in crimson armor that reflected the sunlight, poured onto the city plains. Citizens scattered, and the queens, protected by elite guards, were quickly surrounded. The humans fought bravely, but the legion's discipline and technology were overwhelming. It was not brutality in the violent sense that shocked the queens, but the cold efficiency of conquest, an unfeeling, calculated operation that left no room for negotiation. Arya, Selene, and Talia were captured swiftly. Bound and escorted aboard a massive legion ship, the queen's outward composure hid the storm of thoughts within them. Their minds raced, not with fear but with strategy. To surrender physically was not defeat, only a temporary setback. They had survived worse, and they would survive this too. The interior of the Legion ship was unlike anything humans had encountered. Smooth, dark walls pulsed faintly with a crimson glow. Alien symbols, indecipherable yet hypnotic, adorned every surface. The queens were placed in separate cells, each a transparent cylinder suspended midair, giving the impression of weightlessness. It was meant to intimidate, to break morale, but to human minds it was also an opportunity, observation. They could see the guards, the routines, the patterns. Every detail mattered. Days passed with unnerving predictability. The queens were fed, monitored, and occasionally questioned, not with words, but with devices that scanned thoughts and emotions. The aliens believed their technology could dominate humanity, could bend human minds to submission. They were wrong. The queens learned quickly to control their emotions, to shield their thoughts. Every glance from a guard, every shift of light became a piece of intelligence. The aliens assumed obedience. The queens practiced patience. Queen Arya in her cell began to speak softly to herself, rehearsing mental maps of the ship, memorizing the patrol routes of guards, and noting weaknesses in their surveillance. Talia practiced subtle movements, tiny adjustments of her environment, testing gravity fields and sensors for inconsistencies. Selene, ever the strategist, analyzed every interaction, predicting how the aliens would respond to changes. Each queen became a silent agent of observation, gathering the tools for a future they would not let the legions predict. Despite the confinement, human spirit found ways to shine. Small gestures of resistance, adjusting a panel, leaving a mark unnoticed, subtly influencing guards, became victories in themselves. They reminded each other, in fleeting mental messages transmitted through the limited psychic network they had discovered, that captivity did not equal surrender. Humanity endured. Humanity adapted. Humanity learned. The legions, confident in their superiority, underestimated a key human trait: ingenuity. Where machines imposed rules, humans found loopholes. Where armies enforced discipline, humans discovered unpredictability. Even in what seemed like helplessness, the queens were plotting a path to freedom, exploiting the arrogance of their captors. One night, the ship passed near a dying star, its radiation bathing the quarters in an eerie golden light. Arya, lying in her suspended cell, studied the star's reflection through the glass. A thought crystallized in her mind. Survival depended not on brute strength, not on technology, but on understanding the enemy's mind. The legions were precise, predictable, and proud. Their pride was their weakness. By the third Solara cycle aboard the ship, the queens had begun subtle collaboration. Using tiny vibrations, visual cues, and the unspoken language of intuition, they communicated. Each shared observations, guard rotations, security gaps, and technology quirks. They started to see patterns, patterns that revealed the Legion's vulnerabilities. Even in their luxurious, cold imprisonment, a seed of rebellion was taking root. Talia spoke first softly to Arya through the psychic resonance they had discovered. They think we are broken. They believe our fear will make us weak. They are wrong. We observe. We learn. One day we act. Selene's response was sharp and concise as always. Every empire has flaws. Every system has gaps. We will find them. And when we do, we will remind them why humanity never submits. Together, the queens became more than prisoners. They became silent strategists, teachers of resilience and symbols of the unbreakable human spirit. Each day of captivity reinforced a simple truth: the human mind could never be enslaved. It could be challenged, contained, even cornered, but never extinguished. Across the ship, the legions continued their routines, unaware that every gesture, every glance, every assumption was being recorded and analyzed. They believed the queens were terrified, obedient, and powerless. They did not understand that true power often lies beneath the surface, in patience, observation, and intellect. As the queens settled into their new reality, one thing became clear: the battle had only just begun. The legions may have conquered space and subjugated worlds, but they had yet to confront the true strength of humanity: courage, ingenuity, and unity. And in the silence of their captivity, The queens prepared for the day they would turn the tide. The stars outside glimmered with promise, and for the first time since the invasion began, hope burned brighter than fear. Humanity had faced threats before. It had endured famine, war, and exile, and it had always risen. These queens, leaders of colonies, custodians of human civilization, knew that survival was not just about living. It was about learning, adapting, and preparing to strike when the moment was right. And the moment would come. Days turned into cycles aboard the Crimson Legion flagship, a floating fortress of steel, light, and alien precision. The queens, though separated physically, were closer than ever in thought. Even in their transparent cylinders, suspended in midair, they were never truly alone. They shared ideas, strategies, and silent encouragement through the subtle psychic resonance they had discovered, an unspoken bond born from necessity and survival. Arya spent hours studying the patterns of the Legion soldiers. They moved with absolute certainty, like clockwork, every step measured and deliberate. To a casual observer, this precision was strength, but to Arya it was predictability. She noted the timing of shifts, the moments when guards paused at control panels, and the few seconds they took to confer with one another. Every gesture, no matter how small, was information, a clue to understanding the enemy. Talia, in her cylinder across the ship, focused on technology. She could feel the hum of alien machinery through the floor vibrations, the subtle pulse of energy through the walls. The security systems were advanced, but not flawless. There were gaps, small and nearly invisible, where sensors failed to detect subtle changes. A door that seemed permanently locked had a weak electromagnetic seal. A surveillance drone, programmed to follow set routes, had blind spots at its edges. To human minds trained in observation, these weaknesses were opportunities. Selene, ever the strategist, began connecting the dots. She tracked the patrols, analyzed the energy patterns, and considered the psychology of the aliens. They were disciplined, yes, but overconfident. They underestimated humans. Their entire strategy relied on fear and obedience. Humans, by contrast, thrived under challenge. Where the aliens expected submission, the queens plotted resistance. The first small act of rebellion came almost by accident. A Legion soldier entered Arya's chamber to deliver food, unaware that the queen's mind was already calculating the optimal timing for movement. With a subtle shift of her cylinder's suspension controls, she altered its orientation, creating a momentary disorientation in the soldier. He stumbled slightly, caught off guard. It was minor, almost imperceptible, yet to Arya it was proof. Even the most rigid system had flaws. Word of her success reached Talia and Selene through their psychic network. A ripple of excitement passed between them, unspoken but profound. Humanity had survived far greater threats, but this was a test not of strength, but of wit. And humans, they knew, were clever beyond measure. Over the next cycles, the queens began cataloging every detail. They observed meal routines, noting when guards were relaxed, and recorded the times when ship systems were most vulnerable. They discovered that the Legion's sensors, though advanced, could not detect slow, consistent movement against the rhythm of the ship's vibrations. They learned the timing of drone sweeps, the synchronization of security doors, and the procedures of alien communication. Every detail built a mental map of the fortress they were trapped in. Arya realized that patience was key. "We cannot act too soon," she told the others through their resonance. "Every attempt now would be visible. We need precision. We need control. And we must understand the enemy completely before we strike," Talia agreed. "Observation is our weapon. Knowledge is our strength. Even in this cage, we are free in our minds." Selene, as always, thought several steps ahead, "and we will turn their strength into weakness." They rely on discipline, on order, but humanity thrives in chaos. One clever move, and their entire operation can unravel. As they continued their observations, they noticed something unexpected. Not all the legions were loyal without question. Small signs of hesitation appeared in some soldiers. A glance held too long, a frown when orders seemed irrational, a hesitation before executing commands. The aliens were not perfect. Authority, even in their rigid system, was not absolute. And the queens, ever perceptive, took note. Human intuition could exploit doubt and hesitation in ways no machine could predict. Then came the first true test of their patience. A minor power fluctuation rippled through the ship, disrupting the energy flow to several monitoring systems. It was brief, barely noticeable, but to Talia it was significant. "This is an opportunity," she whispered, though her words were only heard in the minds of her sisters in strategy. "We must wait for the right sequence, but this is a sign. Their technology, while impressive, is not flawless." Days later, another anomaly occurred. A transport shuttle moved erratically in the docking bay due to a miscalculated gravitational adjustment. The queens watched, analyzed, and learned. They began noting patterns in the errors, realizing that even the most advanced empire had human-like flaws, assumptions, small mistakes, and overconfidence. Using these observations, they began coordinating subtle manipulations. Arya would time movements in her cylinder to create tiny vibrations. Talia adjusted energy fields to trigger minor alerts in monitoring systems. Selene observed the reactions of the guards, calculating which ones were predictable, which were overzealous, and which could be distracted. Each small act built a rhythm of resistance, invisible to the legions, but laying the foundation for something greater. The queens also considered morale. They spoke to each other about human history, great leaders, past victories, moments of resilience. Though isolated, they shared stories of courage, ensuring that their spirits remained unbroken. Captivity was not their defeat. They reminded each other that humanity's greatest strength was its mind, its ability to think, to adapt, and to overcome. One cycle, Arya noticed a subtle flaw in the communication systems between the bridge and the cells. The signals were encrypted, yes, but they followed a predictable pattern. Using careful timing and mental focus, she began decoding fragments of messages, discovering when patrols would shift and when drones would sweep the corridors. This knowledge was priceless. The queens began to speak openly of the future, imagining their escape, planning the first steps of their rebellion. Selene, ever the tactician, suggested the next move. "We do not attack, we disrupt. One small disruption repeated will sow confusion. They rely on order." "We will teach them chaos," Talia agreed. "And every disruption we create will test them, reveal more of their weaknesses. We act with patience, precision, and purpose." They began small. A guard's patrol was subtly delayed. A sensor would flicker at the perfect moment to trigger a minor alert. A control panel, slightly misaligned, would confuse monitoring drones. Each act was tiny, almost invisible, but cumulative effects began to emerge. Guards hesitated, sensors tripped unnecessarily, and the alien commanders grew puzzled. They could not understand why systems that should operate flawlessly were faltering. Through all this, the Queen's unity was their greatest weapon. Though isolated physically, their mental and emotional coordination created a level of strategy far beyond anything the legions expected. Where the aliens saw prisoners, humans saw opportunity. Where the aliens sought obedience, humans sought understanding. Every challenge became a lesson, every restriction a training ground, every observation a potential advantage. Then came the moment that tested their courage in a new way. A higher-ranking Legion officer, unlike the others, began paying attention to the anomalies. He was sharper, more cautious, and began questioning the routines of his subordinates. The Queens realized that discovery was imminent. Patience alone would no longer suffice. They needed to escalate subtly, to force the aliens to reveal even more of their weaknesses. Arya, Talia, and Selene convened mentally, discussing the next phase. They would not strike directly. Instead, they would manipulate the aliens' confidence, forcing errors and revealing vulnerabilities. One misstep, carefully guided, could open the path for human intervention. The plan began with a small psychological tactic. A patrol drone's routine was adjusted, just slightly enough to create uncertainty among the guards. When a sensor tripped unnecessarily, the guards would assume malfunction, and the officers would issue new orders, creating hesitation. Small, repeated hesitations, the Queens knew, could grow into confusion. Humanity thrived in these cracks, the cracks that revealed the limits of alien discipline. As the cycles progressed, the Queens also discovered that the legions underestimated the power of communication. Humans could coordinate in ways the aliens could not predict, blending intuition, strategy, and timing. Mental messages, subtle gestures, and shared observations created a network of information stronger than any system. Even in isolation, they were connected. Even in captivity, they were free in their minds. Then came a breakthrough. Talia, observing the energy flows of the ship, noticed that certain pathways were less protected during system transitions. A momentary glitch in the energy matrix created a window, brief, almost invisible, but enough to allow minor manipulation. She shared the observation with Arya and Selene. Together, they planned to exploit it carefully, testing the limits of alien detection and control. "This is our moment," Arya said, her mind focused and calm. "One small step, invisible, undetectable. We will learn everything and then we will act." Selene nodded. "And when the time comes, we strike with precision. Humanity does not fight blindly. We strike with knowledge, courage, and unity. That is our strength." Talia added softly, "Even in the cage we are free, and freedom is the seed of victory." The Queens continued their preparations, each day strengthening their understanding, their coordination, and their resolve. The Crimson Legions believed they had captured humanity's leaders. That fear would bend their will. But the Queens had turned captivity into a classroom, observation into power, and patience into strategy. And in the quiet hum of the alien ship, the seeds of rebellion were quietly growing. Humanity's greatest weapon, the mind, was readying itself for the moment it would change everything. For the first time, the Queens smiled, not in relief, not in hope, but in recognition of their own power. They were not just prisoners. They were observers, strategists, and planners. They were humanity, unbroken, unstoppable, and unyielding. The stars outside continued their silent journey, unaware that within the heart of the Crimson Legion flagship, humanity's spirit was already turning the tide. The Crimson Legion flagship drifted through the void, its crimson hull reflecting distant starlight like molten metal. Within, the Queens remained in their suspended cells, yet the sense of imprisonment was fading. Each day of observation, each small disruption, had strengthened their confidence. Humanity thrived not in isolation but in clever adaptation, and the Queens were living proof of that truth. Arya, lying in her cylinder, observed the guards more closely than ever. They moved with precision, yet the pattern had begun to change. Confusion, once imperceptible, was now visible. A drone that should have hovered in a fixed path wavered slightly. A patrol guard paused longer than usual at a junction, frowning at a sensor display that flickered erratically. "See that?" she whispered into the psychic network she shared with Talia and Selene. "Our small disruptions are working. They are reacting. That is all we need." Talia's response came like a breeze in Arya's mind. "Yes, but we must remain subtle. Any overt act will alert them. Patience, precision, and timing, those are our weapons." Selene, analytical as always, added, "We are teaching them to doubt themselves. Their discipline is cracking. Their overconfidence is failing. One careful move can turn doubt into chaos." The Queen's first deliberate act of sabotage was almost invisible. Talia manipulated a minor energy flow within her cell, creating a small but critical glitch in the security sensors. It was brief, lasting only seconds, but enough to misalign a drone's scanning pattern. The drone, instead of its usual precise path, veered slightly off course. Guards monitoring the feed were momentarily distracted, debating whether the drone was malfunctioning or under attack. Arya used that moment to practice subtle movement in her cylinder, adjusting its orientation to maximize observational advantage. From this position, she could see the guards' responses more clearly, noting hesitation and confusion. Each small victory reinforced a fundamental principle. Humans could thrive even in confinement, using intellect and observation to bend reality to their will. Over the next cycles, the queens increased their efforts. Each subtle manipulation was carefully planned. A guard's shift would be slightly delayed, a drone's path subtly altered, a control panel's light blinked at just the wrong time. Each minor disruption added another layer of uncertainty. The aliens, who relied on order and predictability, began to falter, reacting to phantom problems created by human ingenuity. Even more remarkable was the way the queens began to coordinate these actions. Though physically separated, their psychic network allowed them to synchronize moves with precision. Arya timed a disruption to coincide with Talia's energy adjustment, creating confusion that seemed spontaneous to the aliens. Selene guided the timing, calculating the precise sequence that would produce the maximum effect. For the first time, the queens felt a taste of power. They were prisoners, yes, but the roles had subtly reversed. They were no longer passive. They were active strategists, forcing the aliens to react, adapt, and reveal weaknesses. Every hesitation in the guards, every flicker of doubt in the officers, was a signal to the queens. The moment to strike would come soon. The alien commander overseeing their captivity, General Kale, began to notice these anomalies. A tall, imposing figure with sharp features, Kale was proud of the Legion's reputation for discipline. He could not understand why minor errors were multiplying. Drones missed patrol points. Doors did not lock as expected. Sensors tripped without cause. He began to suspect that the prisoners were somehow manipulating the systems, though he had no idea how. "This should be impossible," Kale muttered, his voice cold but edged with frustration. "Our systems are flawless. Every failure is human error." But humans, Kale did not yet realize, did not rely solely on systems. They relied on intellect, intuition, and coordination. And these qualities were on full display. The queens recognized the moment of opportunity. A supply shuttle was scheduled to pass through the docking bay, a routine maneuver that should have been unremarkable. Talia noticed that the energy shields protecting the bay would briefly overlap at a specific interval, creating a tiny window where a drone's sensors would be blind. She relayed the information to Arya and Selene. Together, they timed a minor disruption in their respective cells, ensuring that the shuttle's path would appear normal to the crew while the drones misread its movement. The result was spectacular in subtlety. The shuttle moved through the bay undetected, a tiny victory for human ingenuity. The aliens, unaware that their systems had been manipulated, scrambled to investigate the anomaly. Guards second-guessed their routines. Officers double-checked their instruments. And the queens, watching silently from their cylinders, smiled. It was more than a tactical success. It was proof that even in captivity, humans could bend reality with intelligence and patience. Emboldened, the queens began to escalate their operations. They observed the routines of the alien engineers, noting the times when they performed maintenance on weapons, propulsion systems, and communication arrays. Each task provided opportunities for subtle interference. A misaligned conduit here, a delayed calibration there, A minor energy reroute in a cell, each action created cumulative effects that sowed confusion. Arya, Talia, and Selene began to imagine the larger picture. If they could disrupt multiple systems simultaneously, the aliens' confidence would erode further. They would be forced to act reactively rather than proactively. And in such a state, even the mightiest empire could falter. The Queen's understanding of human psychology became critical. They knew that fear and doubt could be leveraged without violence. They used timing, subtle observation, and mental precision to guide the aliens into making mistakes. Each hesitation in a patrol route, each pause in a security scan, each unnecessary recalibration of a weapon system was a victory for human intellect. The psychic network became even more crucial. Mental messages allowed for coordination beyond the limitations of physical signals. Arya would note a drone's deviation, Talia would adjust energy flows to maximize the effect, and Selene would calculate the optimal sequence of delays. Together, they created a synchronized system of subtle sabotage that was invisible to the aliens but devastating in its cumulative effect. Then came the first real test. General Kale ordered an inspection of the cells, believing that tampering must have occurred. He dispatched a team of elite soldiers to monitor the Queens closely, adjusting sensor arrays and increasing surveillance. But the Queens were prepared. Every guard, every drone, every sensor had been observed and analyzed. Minor flaws in equipment calibration provided loopholes. A sensor's delay allowed Arya to shift her cylinder slightly, subtly altering her angle of view. A guard's momentary distraction gave Talia enough time to manipulate an energy field. Selene calculated timing sequences to ensure that every action coincided perfectly. The inspection passed without incident. Kale, frustrated but unaware, assumed his measures were effective. In reality, the Queens had used the opportunity to further map the ship's vulnerabilities. Each act of interference, each calculated move, strengthened their understanding of the ship and the alien forces aboard. Human ingenuity thrived in this environment. The Queens learned that even small actions, repeated consistently, could produce large effects. They practiced patience, observation, and precise timing, refining their mental and physical coordination. They became architects of chaos, invisible yet powerful, their intellect a weapon far sharper than any blade. The turning point came when Talia noticed a structural flaw in the energy matrix powering the ship's propulsion system. A slight misalignment in the conduits created the potential for temporary disruption, enough to delay or reroute power without triggering alarms. "This is it," Talia said in the psychic network. "A small disruption, perfectly timed, could force the entire crew to respond reactively. We will learn more about their weaknesses in one move than we could in weeks of observation." Arya agreed. "And we will remain undetected." Precision is key. Humanity has survived because we act wisely, not recklessly. This is our moment. Selene added, "Once we understand the full scope of their response, we can plan the next phase. Every reaction will reveal their limits, their weaknesses, their assumptions. And that knowledge will be our greatest weapon." The Queens executed the disruption with meticulous care. Talia manipulated the energy flow. Arya timed the cylinder adjustments to create maximum observational advantage, and Selene coordinated the sequence. The propulsion system faltered just enough to trigger a response from the alien crew. Alarms sounded. Officers shouted orders. Guards scrambled to check systems. Drones veered from their programmed paths. And yet, the Queens remained calm, silent observers in their cylinders. Their subtle interference had created a perfect storm of confusion, without direct confrontation or violence. The humans had turned the tables, forcing the aliens to reveal their vulnerabilities. Kale, now fully aware that something was amiss, attempted to regain control. But each reaction only exposed another weakness. The queens had learned the patterns of response, the timing of commands, and the limits of technology. Humanity's ingenuity, patience, and coordination had transformed a moment of observation into a strategic advantage. As the ship drifted through the void, the queens realized the truth. Even the mightiest empire could be outsmarted. Discipline, technology, and numbers were powerful, but intellect, adaptability, and unity were stronger. Humanity, in all its resilience, had found a way to turn captivity into opportunity. Arya, Talia, and Selene smiled at one another through the psychic network. The path to freedom was still long, but the first cracks had appeared in the Legion's armor. The queens were no longer merely observing. They were shaping the battlefield, guiding the enemy into errors and preparing for the ultimate strike. Humanity's greatest weapon had revealed itself. Not firepower, not strength, not fear, but mind, courage, and unity. And in that revelation, the queens found the certainty that no cage, no empire, and no oppressor could ever contain their spirit. The stars outside remained silent witnesses to the quiet rise of human ingenuity. And within the heart of the Crimson Legion flagship, a seed of rebellion was no longer hidden. It had begun to grow, patiently, subtly, and unstoppable. The crimson glow of the Legion flagship had become almost familiar to the queens. Days of observation, patience, and subtle sabotage had transformed the once imposing ship into a landscape they understood intimately. Every corridor, every control panel, every patrol route had been memorized. Every flaw, no matter how small, had been noted. They were no longer prisoners. They were strategists, architects of chaos, and silent harbingers of human ingenuity. Arya floated in her cell, eyes focused on the control panels across the room. Her mind mapped every possibility, every sequence of movement, every potential reaction of the alien crew. She was calm, precise, and confident. Through the psychic network, she coordinated with Talia and Selene, each queen acting as a piece in a larger strategy that had been carefully constructed over cycles. "We've reached the moment," Arya's thought echoed in the minds of the others. "Every observation, every small disruption has brought us here. We know their systems. We know their routines. Now we act." Talia's response was immediate, sharp with anticipation. "Our interference will cascade. Every reaction will reveal more weaknesses. They will believe they are regaining control, but they will only tighten the net that we designed." Selene's analytical mind calculated the timing down to the smallest fraction of a cycle. And when the first domino falls, the rest will follow. Discipline cannot withstand intelligent unpredictability. The queens began their coordinated operation. First, they created a controlled disruption in the ship's propulsion systems. Talia adjusted the energy conduits subtly, enough to force recalibration without triggering alarms that would endanger them. The ship's artificial gravity fluctuated briefly in minor sectors, drawing attention from the bridge. Simultaneously, Arya manipulated her cylinder's orientation to create small physical disturbances that affected sensors monitoring her cell. The data appeared as anomalies to the alien operators. Drones, already slightly off course from previous minor disruptions, began to deviate further, their patterns no longer predictable. Guards scrambled to correct the errors, unaware that they were falling precisely into the Queen's plan. Selene timed the final component of the first phase. She used mental coordination to ensure that the three cells created a network of influence, subtly affecting the ship's control panels during the chaos. Lights flickered, doors shifted, and energy flows pulsed erratically, all within the limits that kept the Queens undetected. From the bridge, General Kale watched in disbelief. "Systems are failing. Drones are off course." "Guards, what is happening?" His voice carried authority, but uncertainty had crept into his tone. He ordered recalibrations, additional surveillance, and inspections. Every command, every reaction played into the Queen's hands. The first phase succeeded. The ship, meant to be a symbol of control and power, became a maze of minor confusion, each small disruption invisible yet significant. The Queens observed silently, noting each reaction, each hesitation. Their minds worked like synchronized engines, turning knowledge into power. Phase 2 began. The Queens focused on the guards' routines. By now they had memorized patterns, noting every pause, glance, and predictable movement. Using subtle psychic nudges, they coordinated minor distractions that drew guards away from key areas. Doors were left unlocked for seconds, drones diverted by programmed anomalies, and energy conduits shifted to create temporary blind spots. Arya's cylinder floated closer to the observation panel, allowing her to monitor the bridge's main systems directly. Talia fine-tuned the energy flows to ensure that each disruption aligned perfectly with the guards' positions. Selene calculated the sequence of movements that would maximize confusion while keeping the Queen safe. The aliens, trained for absolute precision, were unprepared for such coordinated unpredictability. Systems designed for flawless order failed, one after another, as the Queen's subtle manipulations created a cascade of errors. Drones collided, doors locked and unlocked unpredictably, and sensors misread energy fluctuations. Every reaction from the crew revealed further vulnerabilities, mapping the path to freedom. Finally, the Queens initiated the third phase, access to the cell locks. They had observed the locking mechanisms for cycles and discovered a subtle flaw in the synchronization sequence. With careful timing, Talia adjusted the energy pulse slightly, Arya manipulated the cylinder's magnetic field, and Selene coordinated the exact moment when the locks would disengage. The cylinders unlocked silently. Gravity adjusted to allow the Queens to descend gently. Each movement was precise, controlled, and deliberate. The aliens, distracted by systemic failures elsewhere, did not notice the prisoners stepping free. Once on the deck, the Queens moved with stealth and coordination. They had memorized every corridor, every camera, and every guard's tendency to pause or respond. The ship's confusion played to their advantage. Where the aliens expected submission, they encountered calculated movement. Where they anticipated weakness, they found strategy. The Queen's first objective was the central command hub. From there, they could control ship systems temporarily, redirect energy flows, and ensure a safe path for the planetary colonies, human reinforcements, already en route. Every step had been planned, every contingency anticipated. The human mind, as always, proved adaptable beyond alien expectation. Guards attempted to intercept, but hesitation betrayed them. The Queens used movement, timing, and distraction to bypass obstacles. Talia subtly manipulated energy fields to create barriers that delayed the aliens without causing harm. Arya's precision movements diverted patrols, and Selene's strategy ensured that each guard encountered only the confusion necessary to move the Queens forward. They reached the central hub, a room pulsating with alien technology and control panels. With swift efficiency, the Queens accessed the systems. Talia adjusted the internal power flows, diverting energy to ensure life support stability while destabilizing weapon calibration sequences. Arya monitored all access points, noting guard movements and system responses. Selene coordinated the timing for planetary reinforcements, ensuring that the colony's fleets would arrive to support the final stage of the operation. From the ship's bridge, General Kale attempted to regain control. All units, re-establish protocols, identify intruders, lock down the command hub. His voice was authoritative but edged with frustration. Every order, however, was anticipated and countered by the Queen's precise actions. Human ingenuity had turned chaos into a tool, and the aliens were powerless to stop it. The Queens initiated the final phase, signaling the colonies. Using the ship's communication array, they transmitted secure coordinates and system vulnerabilities to the human fleets orbiting nearby planets. The fleets, guided by the Queen's instructions, executed maneuvers that complemented the disruption aboard the flagship. Fighters disabled defensive drones, energy pulses diverted weapon systems, and human engineers hacked minor subsystems to amplify the chaos. The combined effect was overwhelming. The Crimson Legion flagship, a symbol of their might, was now a controlled battlefield in human hands. Errors compounded upon errors, and the aliens, once confident in their superiority, were now scrambling, uncertain, and reactive. Discipline and order, the very foundations of their empire, had been turned against them. Arya, Talia, and Selene watched from the command hub as the human fleets advanced. Ships they had only seen in distant orbit now moved with precision, following the Queen's guidance. Each maneuver, each calculated strike, highlighted humanity's ingenuity and courage. No alien weapon could match the coordinated intelligence and strategy of the humans. The Queens did not celebrate. There was no room for arrogance. Every moment was focused, every action deliberate. Even victory required precision. They guided the human forces to neutralize critical systems aboard the flagship without unnecessary destruction, ensuring that the alien prisoners were contained and the ship remained operational enough to retreat if necessary. General Kale, realizing that control was lost, attempted a final desperate maneuver. He ordered the flagship's engines to engage in full propulsion, hoping to escape and regroup. But the Queens had anticipated this. Talia's energy manipulations delayed the engines, synchronization. Arya created sensor anomalies to confuse navigation, and Selene coordinated with the human fleet to intercept and guide the ship safely. In the end, the flagship was surrounded, its weapons neutralized, its crew disoriented. Humanity had not won through brute force, but through intellect, strategy, and unity. The Queens had orchestrated a triumph that demonstrated the true strength of their species: mind, courage, and resilience. Once the situation stabilized, the Queens contacted the captured alien officers, ensuring their cooperation. The legions, confronted with humans who had outsmarted them, were humbled. They recognized, perhaps for the first time, that intellect and adaptability could surpass strength and discipline. The Queens returned to their colonies, greeted not as prisoners, but as heroes. Humanity's spirit, long underestimated, had prevailed. Every citizen understood that courage, wisdom, and unity could overcome even the most formidable opponent. Arya addressed the Council of Colonies from Lithuria, her voice carrying calm authority. "We have faced an empire that believed strength alone could conquer us. They were wrong. Humanity endures not because of weapons or numbers, but because of intellect, courage, and unity. Today, we have shown the galaxy what it means to be human." Talia added, "Our freedom was not given. It was earned through patience, observation, and strategy. Let this be a reminder. No challenge is insurmountable when humans act together with courage and intelligence." Selene concluded, "The galaxy has seen our strength. Not in destruction, but in resilience. Not in fear, but in wisdom. We are humanity. We endure. We adapt. We prevail." The colonies erupted in celebration, not for the defeat of enemies, but for the triumph of human spirit. Citizens cheered, fleets maneuvered with precision, and leaders reaffirmed their commitment to unity and wisdom. Across the stars, humanity's message was clear. Intellect, courage, and collaboration were forces no empire could suppress. And above it all, the Queens stood together, symbols of unbroken spirit, guiding humanity toward a future defined not by fear, but by intelligence, resilience, and hope. They had been captured, observed, and tested, and yet they had turned captivity into opportunity, adversity into strategy, and oppression into triumph. The stars outside continued their silent journey, indifferent yet witness to the rise of human ingenuity. The Crimson Legion had learned a lesson no amount of technology or discipline could teach. The human mind, united and courageous, was a force beyond calculation, a power beyond control, and a spirit beyond defeat. And humanity, led by its queens, would never be underestimated again.